The rain came down like grief, loud, relentless, blinding. She stood beneath the skeletal awning of a forgotten warehouse, soaked to the bone, trembling as much from fear as from regret. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her eyes refusing to meet his. "You shouldn't be here either," he replied, stepping through the storm, his voice breaking like the sky above them. "I just wanted to protect you," she said. "You didn't protect me," he said softly. "You shattered me." And then she ran, but he chased her not out of anger, not to stop her, but to finally catch the pieces of his heart that had walked away with her. This is not just a story about love, it's a story about healing, about second chances, broken beginnings, and the storm that brought them home. So before we begin, take a breath, let your heart open. And if you're someone who believes that compassion still matters, that love finds us even in the unlikeliest places, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Because some stories aren't just told, they're felt. Let's begin. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Willow Ridge, tossing leaves and broken twigs into the flooded gutters. Streetlights flickered in the mist like tired sentinels, their reflections dancing across the glistening pavement. In the back seat of a sleek town car, Ethan Blake sat quietly, his forehead leaning against the cool glass. The day had drained him tense negotiations, relentless phone calls, and the heavy knowledge that his company's future rested on choices only he could make. His suit was crisp, but his soul felt worn. The car slowed as it turned onto a quieter lane, barely wide enough for two vehicles. Suddenly the driver hit the brakes. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice low-edged with fatigue. "There's someone ahead," the driver murmured, gesturing. Through the fogged windshield, Ethan saw her, a woman soaked to the bone, standing in the middle of the road with a small boy wrapped tightly in her arms. She wasn't crying, but the desperation in her eyes was unmistakable. The driver rolled the window down just enough. "Ma'am, you need to step aside. This is dangerous, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Just a few blocks. My boy is cold, and we've got nowhere else to go tonight." The man behind the glass remained still for a moment, watching. The woman's coat clung to her like a second skin, her shoes completely drenched. The boy, perhaps around 4, was asleep against her shoulder lips, pale hands curled tight. The driver shook his head. "I'm sorry, miss. We can't take any risks." She nodded faintly, shoulders sagging with quiet resignation, and turned to walk away. Then Ethan opened the door. "Wait. Get in," he said, his tone gentle but firm. She turned, startled. "What I said, get in." "It's all right." She hesitated only a heartbeat before climbing in, cradling the child protectively. Her hair dripped onto the leather seats, her breath shallow, cautious. The driver caught Ethan's gaze in the mirror but didn't speak. He shifted into drive, and the car eased forward again through the rain. Inside, the silence was soft and heavy. The woman looked down at the sleeping boy, brushing wet strands of hair from his forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Ethan gave a quiet nod, then glanced over. "Where are you heading?" "Just somewhere warm," she said, her voice raw. "We don't have a place right now." He noticed the faint bruising on her arms, the haunted way her eyes avoided his. "What's your name?" he asked Clara. She answered after a moment, "And this is Eli." He offered his hand. "Ethan." Her fingers were cold, but there was something steady in the way she held his hand, like someone who had been through storms before and still hadn't let go. Outside, the rain poured without mercy. Inside the car, two strangers sat in silence, not yet connected, but no longer alone. Ethan Blake observed Clara Monroe from the corner of his eye as the car slowly wound through a quiet street. He noted every tired line on her face and the gentle way she cradled her son Eli close to her. After a few moments of silence, he spoke softly. "Do you have any family nearby?" Clara's eyes fell, and with a slight shake of her head, she replied, "No. It's just us." Ethan paused, his gaze steady and compassionate. "Then you will come with me," he decided firmly. Clara looked at him, a mixture of confusion and cautious hope in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan explained, "I have a guest house on my estate. It's safe, warm, and dry, a place where you and Eli can stay until you find your footing." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, and in that moment, gratitude softened the strain of her worries. "Thank you," she whispered, hardly able to believe his kindness. "I don't know what to say." "No words are needed," Ethan replied with a gentle nod. "Just take care of your son." As the car pulled into the grand driveway of Ethan's estate, a sprawling property embraced by towering trees, the gates opened with silent grace. The main house glowed warmly against the dark, stormy sky. The vehicle came to a smooth stop near the modest guest house. Ethan stepped out first, extending an umbrella over Clara and Eli as they exited the car. Leading them inside, he guided them through the quaint, comfortable space. "There is food in the kitchen and essentials in the bathroom," he assured her warmly. "Make yourselves at home." Clara's eyes widened with wonder and disbelief. "This is more than I ever hoped for." "Thank you," Ethan's smile was kind. "Rest for now. We will talk more in the morning." Just before he left, little Eli reached up and gently touched Ethan's hand. "Thank you, sir," he said in a soft voice. Ethan's heart softened at the child's gesture. "You're welcome, Eli." Stepping out into the rain once again, Ethan watched as the guest house's windows began to glow softly in the early dawn. Inside, Clara held Eli close, whispering, "Maybe things are finally looking up." Later, Ethan stood alone for a moment beneath the receding storm, his mind racing with thoughts of the unexpected encounter that had just altered the course of two lives. The promise of a new beginning felt real in that fleeting, rain-soaked instant. "Thank you. I won't waste this chance," Clara had said softly that first night. And she didn't. In the weeks that followed, Clara found her rhythm within the quiet corners of Ethan Harrington's estate. Each morning, she rose before sunrise, helping the housekeeper prepare breakfast, straightening rooms, folding linens, and sweeping hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors. Her presence was gentle, almost invisible, but deeply felt. Eli, her son, adapted quickly to their new life. He spent his days playing in the garden, often beneath the watchful yet amused eyes of Ethan's discreet security staff, who had been told to give the boy space and kindness. The estate had become a haven, not grand to Clara because of its size, but because it was safe, and for the first time in years, quiet. Clara kept her distance from Ethan. She was polite, never overstepping. She knocked before entering any room. She spoke only when spoken to. She was a guest who behaved like a ghost. But Ethan noticed her all the same. He noticed the way every napkin she folded sat with precise, perfect corners, the way she paused mid-sweep to lift Eli's toys with reverent care, how she hummed under her breath as she watered the plants in the hallway, whispering encouragement, as if they too had weathered storms. And then there were the small moments that stayed with him, the morning he glimpsed her in the kitchen, bathed in soft sunlight, eyes closed, simply breathing. Or the evening he caught sight of her slowly twirling with Eli in her arms, both of them dancing to a tune only they could hear. But the moment that etched itself deepest into Ethan's memory came on a night carved out of silence. Unable to sleep, he wandered from his study just before midnight, his chest tight with thoughts that refused to settle, memories, regrets, old ghosts. He headed to the kitchen, hoping a cup of tea might quiet his mind. What he found instead stopped him cold. The dim glow of the stovetop light cast a soft warmth over the tiled floor. Clara was there, curled on the ground with Eli in her arms. The child was asleep, cheeks pink, breaths slow. Clara had dozed off upright, her back against the cabinet, one arm wrapped around her son, the other still holding a half-folded towel. Ethan moved quietly, crouching to gently lift the blanket higher over the child's tiny body. His hand hovered over Eli's cheek for a moment, before shifting toward Clara. Her hair had slipped loose from its tie, her features softened in sleep weariness written across her expression, even in rest. It was Ethan, thought the most honest moment he'd seen in years, raw, unguarded, and sacred in a way that defied words. He adjusted the blanket again, brushing Clara's hand by accident. She stirred. Their eyes met. I didn't mean to fall asleep here, she whispered immediately, sitting upright. Eli had a nightmare, and it's okay, Ethan said gently, straightening up. The kitchen's warmer than most rooms, I understand. She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I'll take him back, you can leave him. Ethan replied, Just rest too. You look like you haven't in years. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. Clara was still watching him, eyes soft with something unspoken. In that quiet space between them, something shifted. Not loud, not defined, but unmistakably real. From that night forward, the house felt different. The once cold, echoing halls began to carry warmth. There was cinnamon in the air from Clara's baking lullabies hummed through the open garden doors, and the kitchen echoed not with silence, but with gentle laughter and dishes washed by hand. Ethan didn't name the change, but every morning as he passed the guesthouse window and caught the sound of Clara singing to Eli, he found himself slowing down just to listen. Clara didn't just occupy the guest house over time, she quietly became a presence that the entire estate seemed to lean toward, not a visitor, not staff, but something gentler like sunlight slowly softening old stone. She moved with unspoken grace, opening heavy curtains each morning to let in light that hadn't touched those rooms in years. Sweeping quietly through long-forgotten hallways, planting sprigs of thyme and mint outside the kitchen door, baking loaves of bread whose scent wrapped around the old walls like memories long buried. There was a change in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Ethan noticed it without understanding at first. The stillness that had gripped his home since loss had made its home there was starting to shift. At first he stayed home more out of circumstance. An investor meeting canceled a call taken in the garden library instead of the office downtown. Then it became something else. He lingered over breakfast longer than necessary, wandered past the kitchen even when he had no reason to, paused by open doors to catch snatches of Eli's laughter as Clara taught him to press wildflowers between pages of old poetry books. He noticed things, details he'd forgotten how to see. The way Clara hummed softly as she stirred soup on the stove. The way her hair changed, depending on her mood, braided when focused loose and tousled when she baked, tied back tightly when she was tired. The way Eli's joy filled the once sterile corridors with life again. And every time Clara laughed, not out of politeness, but a real, unguarded laugh, Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, something old, something long ignored. They started talking more, not about chores or schedules, but about art music, what made a home. Clara told him about growing up in a seaside town where the wind smelled like salt and daisies, about how she once dreamed of opening a little flower shop, how storms made her feel safe, like the world was wrapping itself around her for a while. Ethan listened, not distractedly, not half-heartedly, but like he hadn't really heard another human voice in years. He told her things too, never the big things, not yet, but fragments of truth, that he despised formal black-tie events, that he cherished the quiet just before dawn, when even the city held its breath, that he didn't believe in fate. But sometimes he wondered. One golden afternoon, Ethan stood at the window of his study. Outside, Clara knelt among the rose bushes, gently pruning as Eli sat nearby in the grass, drawing patterns in the soil with a twig. She reached out and tucked a curl from Eli's brow, and her smile, simple, maternal, full of love, hit Ethan like a memory of something he'd never had. That evening, after Eli had drifted off to sleep, Clara served a modest dinner, roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, and warm bread, They ate in the kitchen, their voices soft, the light low. "Work, okay?" she asked gently, pouring him a second cup of tea. Ethan gave a small shrug. Same old thing. Figures, forecasts, noise. Clara smiled, folding her hands around her own cup. "You make it sound thrilling." He laughed quietly. "It's not." She studied him for a moment, her gaze quiet but steady. "You know," she said. After a pause from the outside, "you look like someone who has it all." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The house. The suits. The company. Most people would trade places with you in a second. He didn't respond, just looked at her waiting. But she continued, her voice softening. "I've had some very lonely nights. And still, sometimes, you seem lonelier than I've ever felt." Ethan didn't flinch. She didn't press further. Just met his eyes. No judgment, no pity. Only the kind of understanding that can only come from someone who's walked through their own shadows. And though nothing more was said, Ethan felt it. Something shifting again. Quiet, unnamed, but undeniable. There had been no accusation in Clara's words the night before, only quiet wonder, maybe even concern, and as they lingered in the space between them, Ethan had held her gaze for a moment too long before murmuring, "Appearances can lie." Then he stood abruptly, his tea untouched. "I should get back to some calls," he said, voice cool but distant. Clara didn't stop him. But hours later, as he sat alone before the soft crackle of the fireplace, her voice returned to him, like an echo he hadn't invited. "You look lonelier than I've ever felt." And for the first time in years, he wondered if the ache inside him had finally begun to show. And if someone like her, someone kind, could see past the polished exterior he'd worn for so long. Late afternoon sunlight spilled gently through the tall windows of the library, its golden hue catching the dust as it floated lazily in the air. The stillness was broken only by the creaking of old wood and the occasional whisper of wind. Outside, Clara had spent the morning moving quietly through the space-dusting shelves, folding throws, organizing unread books that hadn't been touched in years. Ethan's study was usually closed off. But today, the door had been left ajar. Eli trailed after her as always, chattering softly as he rolled his little toy truck along the floor. She was adjusting a crooked frame, an old photo of a much younger Ethan beside two smiling people, when Eli's voice lifted behind her. "Look, Mama." He beamed, holding up a small wooden object with both hands. Clara turned, and her heart lurched. "Eli, no, put that down." But before she could cross the room, the door swung open. Ethan stood there. His gaze locked instantly on the carved object in Eli's hands, a miniature wooden house, its corners rounded with age, its roof faded, like it had known decades of sun, and something in Ethan's expression fractured. "Don't touch that." His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, cutting through the warm air like a blade. Eli startled, eyes wide, hands trembling. He dropped the wooden model with a soft thud and then overwhelmed. He burst into tears, running straight into Clara's arms. She wrapped him close, whispering soothing words against his curls. Then she looked up at Ethan, stunned. "He didn't mean to," she said quietly, her voice taut. "He's just a little boy." Ethan didn't answer. He stood, frozen fists, clenched, breath shallow, then turned and left the room without a word. That night, after Eli had cried himself to sleep, Clara stood outside Ethan's study, hesitant. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. She should have just let it be. But something about the look in his eyes wouldn't let her rest. She knocked softly, then opened the door. Ethan didn't look up. He sat hunched at the edge of his old leather chair. The lights dimmed low. The carved house was in his hands, restored. His fingers moved gently along its roofline, tracing it like a path he knew by heart. Clara said nothing. Finally, He spoke, voice rough and unfamiliar. It was the last gift they ever gave me. She stepped into the room, quiet as breath. My parents, Ethan continued. They had it made when I got into university, told me it was a symbol, build something lasting, Ethan. He gave a bitter smile. 2 weeks later they were gone, hit by a drunk driver. They were coming home from a dinner in my honor. Clara drew in a sharp breath. He held the house like it might disappear if he let go. I kept it here to remind me what mattered. Not the business, not the buildings. This Clara moved closer, but still said nothing. The room didn't need words. It needed silence to hold the weight of everything unsaid. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through the trees, and inside the study, amid shadows, soft light, and the memory of a life interrupted. 2 people stood not as strangers anymore, but as survivors of different storms, reaching quietly toward warmth. Neither of them had expected to find I was supposed to have dinner with them that night. Ethan murmured, his voice barely more than breath. But I canceled. Thought a meeting couldn't wait. He paused, eyes fixed on the little wooden house in his hands. I told myself there'd be time. There hadn't been. Clara didn't speak. She slowly sank to the floor beside his chair, her knees folded neatly beneath her. She didn't reach for answers, didn't offer platitudes. She simply sat still and quiet, letting his silence stretch out, unchallenged. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost reverent. I'm sorry. Ethan gave a short nod, the kind that doesn't mean the pain is gone, but that someone else seeing it makes it easier to carry. I wasn't angry at Eli, he said eventually. Not really. I think I was just afraid that something so small could break again. And maybe that makes me weak. Clara laid her hand gently on top of his. It makes you human. And when he turned to look at her, he wasn't the composed man she had met weeks ago. He was someone real, grief-worn and open. For a moment they just stayed there. No need for words, only presence. 2 people quietly learning that healing didn't come in grand gestures, but in the stillness of being seen. The days that followed carried a delicate rhythm. There were no declarations, no dramatic turning points, just the subtle unfolding of something real. Glances held longer. Conversations felt easier. Even Eli, with a child's instinct for unspoken things, started pulling Ethan's hand when they strolled through the garden. He wedged himself comfortably between them during movie nights like it had always been that way. Ethan found himself smiling at small things, a giggle from the hallway, the smell of cinnamon, the soft glow of Clara humming to herself in the kitchen. He didn't speak of tomorrow, but for once, the weight of the past loosened its grip enough for him to breathe in the now. Until the knock came. It was a quiet Saturday. The house was calm. Clara and Eli were making banana bread, their laughter rising in bursts from the kitchen. Ethan was reviewing documents in the study when the intercom crackled. "Sir?" The housekeeper's voice faltered. "There's a man at the gate. He's asking for Miss Clara. Claims he's family." Ethan's brows drew together. Did she mention anyone visiting? "No, sir." But he's insistent. He stepped to the monitor. The grainy screen revealed a man pacing at the entrance, disheveled with darting eyes and clenched fists. Even through the screen, something about him felt off, wrong. "I'll take care of it," Ethan said. But by the time he reached the front entrance, the man had vanished. That night, Clara was unusually quiet. Her hands trembled as she folded the laundry. She flinched when Ethan said her name. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice laced with concern. "I'm fine," she replied too quickly, her smile thin and unconvincing. "Just tired." He wanted to press but didn't. He should have. The next morning, Ethan rose with the light, expecting the usual sound of Eli's footsteps in the hallway and Clara's soft singing from the kitchen. Instead, there was silence. The guest house was empty. The bed neatly made, the drawers cleared. No Eli, no Clara, no scent of warm bread or tea in the air. A wave of panic surged through him. He sprinted back to the main house, calling out checking rooms, alerting the staff. Nothing. Until on the front steps, half hidden beneath a clay pot of lavender, he saw it, a folded note, handwritten, hurried but precise. Ethan, thank you for the roof, for the peace, for giving me and Eli something we hadn't felt in a long time, safety and hope. You gave us a place when we had nowhere, but my past has found me, and I won't let it poison what you've built. You gave us a home. I won't let it become a war zone. Please don't try to find me. Clara Ethan's fingers gripped the note so tightly the paper tore. His heart thundered, a fierce blend of rage and dread crashing through him like a tide. He stormed back into the main house, voice sharp, commanding. Who saw something? Someone must have noticed anything. It was the housekeeper who finally spoke, her voice hesitant. I wasn't sure it was my place, sir. But yesterday I saw a man near the guest house. He was yelling. Clara told him to leave. Ethan turned toward her, his voice a low growl. Did he threaten her? The housekeeper nodded, eyes brimming. He said if she didn't give him money, he'd take the boy. Said she'd never see him again. Something inside Ethan fractured. Pull the security footage. He barked, every camera, every angle. I want his face on every screen in this house. His tone was ice, but underneath pure, relentless panic. He had failed them. He had let her walk away, believing she was safer on her own, and now she and Eli were gone, out there alone. But not for long. He was going to find them. Not just because he had to, but because deep down, they were his. Even if he hadn't admitted it out loud, even if his heart had been too cautious to name it, they belonged with him, and no man, no shadow from her past was going to take them away. The rain came down hard over the outskirts of a forgotten town, turning its cracked sidewalks into murky streams and bending streetlights into ghostly halos. Ethan's coat was soaked, his shoes caked with mud. But he didn't care. He had followed every breadcrumb, ATM activity, bus station security tapes, whispers in late-night diners, until a gas station clerk finally muttered, "Think I saw her woman with a kid working over near the old train yard. Keeps to herself." Now he stood across from a weathered building that used to be a warehouse. Its boarded windows barely held back the storm, but behind one of them he caught a movement, a faint flicker of light, a shadow shifting. He crossed the street, stepping through puddles, heart in his throat. Inside, he found a makeshift shelter, stacked crates, a worn mattress, and a battered space heater humming softly. There, huddled in the corner, was Clara, wrapped in a tattered blanket, arms around Eli. Ethan didn't speak. She looked up and froze. Slowly she stood, shielding the child behind her. She stepped outside, pulling the rusted door shut behind her. The cold rain soaked through her clothes, instantly plastering her hair to her face. "You shouldn't have come," she said. Voice low, fragile. "You shouldn't have left," Ethan replied, stepping forward. Her gaze dropped. "I didn't know where else to go." "You should have come home," he said, voice barely more than a whisper. She shook her head. "It's not your job to fix my life, Ethan. You gave us peace. I couldn't let my past ruin that." He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers, the rain running down his face. "You think peace matters more to me than you do?" She tried to speak, but the words caught. "I've lost people before." He continued, voice cracking. "I've watched them fade, buried them with things I never said. I live with that silence every day. Don't ask me to add you to that list." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "I was just trying to protect you," she whispered. Ethan reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "You already did. The moment you stepped into my life, you gave me something worth protecting again." They stood there, the rain between them, no longer cold, but cleansing. This wasn't about rescue anymore. It was about belonging. I thought, if I slipped away quietly. Clara's voice trembled. You didn't protect me. Ethan cut in, stepping closer. You shattered me. She turned her face, unable to meet his eyes. I'm sorry. And then, like a gust of wind through glass, she ran, her bare feet splashed through puddles, the rain painting her like a ghost fleeing the past. She disappeared down the alley behind the warehouse, heart-pounding breath, ragged, but Ethan was right behind her. He didn't pause. He chased her through the downpour, vision-blurred lungs burning until halfway down the block he reached her. His hand caught her wrist, not forcefully, just enough to stop her. He turned her around. Clara. He gasped. Stop. Please, stop running. She shook her head through sobs, her body trembling, I don't know how. And then, as if something inside her gave way, she crumbled into him. Her arms clutched his coat, face buried in his chest, fists clenched like a child gripping the last piece of shelter left in the world. Around them the storm howled, but Ethan only heard the rhythm of her breath, broken and desperate, and the fragile echo of her heartbeat against his. I've already lost one family. He whispered, his tears vanishing into the rain. Don't let me lose another. Clara cried harder, her walls crumbling with each breath. Years of silence, fear, and survival washed away in that one embrace. You're not alone anymore. Ethan murmured into her hair. And you never will be again. They stayed there motionless in the storm, soaked to the bone, but no longer cold, no longer running. That night, they were not broken. They were beginning again. The morning after was unlike any other. The sun broke gently over the lake like forgiveness, casting warm gold across glass-smooth water. Mist clung to the trees like breath finally exhaled. The storm was gone, not just the one outside, but the one inside them too. 2 weeks after Ethan found Clara, justice finally arrived. With help from his investigator and a razor-sharp legal team, Ethan gathered everything they needed. Video from the estate's cameras, sworn statements from the housekeeper, and threatening messages traced back to Clara's ex-husband. The case was airtight. Within days, the arrest warrant was issued. Clara's past didn't go down screaming. It didn't need to. It just ended. Quietly, finally. And with it went the fear that had clung to her every step. She and Eli returned to the estate, not as guests, not as fugitives, but as family. This time, they didn't sneak in through the back guest house. Ethan met them at the front steps. Eli ran to him, arms wide, a grin lighting up his small face. Clara followed behind, slower, her hand tight around her bag like she feared this life might disappear if she blinked. But it didn't disappear. It only grew more real. Ethan had the east wing of the house redone. New paint in soft colors, thick rugs beneath bare feet, a cozy nook filled with books and stuffed animals, a playroom with a window seat overlooking the rose garden. Outside the patio bloomed with Clara's favorite flowers. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon again. It wasn't just refuge now. It was home. One afternoon, Ethan asked her to walk with him. They strolled hand in hand beside the lake, Eli running ahead with a toy sailboat, his laughter ringing over the water like bells. The trail curved, leading to the quiet spot where Ethan had once sat alone, confessing what he had never told anyone. But this time he didn't sit alone. He was ready to say something he hadn't dared before. They returned to the quiet curve of the lake, the same spot where Ethan had once sat alone with his grief, only this time. Clara was beside him. She tilted her head, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Ethan, she said softly, this doesn't feel like just a walk. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat, his hand closing around something small. When he brought it out, Clara gasped quietly. A velvet box worn at the corners from being held too many times. He opened it slowly. Inside sat a slender gold band, dotted with the faintest line of diamonds. Simple and luminous, like sunlight on still water. I've had so much in this life. Ethan began, his voice low and steady. Homes with more rooms than I could ever fill. Bank accounts. Power success. But none of it ever truly felt like mine. Not until that night you and Eli appeared out of the storm. Clara's hands rose to her lips, her eyes already glistening. I don't want to just protect you anymore, he continued. I want to live beside you, grow old with you, build something lasting, something honest, not out of fear, not out of duty, but because I choose you, both of you, every day. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, the ring still nestled in his hand. Clara, he said, barely more than a whisper, will you marry me? For a moment she didn't move, only cried. Then through trembling lips she nodded. I never thought I deserved love, she said. I thought people like me weren't allowed to hope for things like this. But you. She reached out, fingers brushing his cheek. You made me believe, again. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and just like that, the world shifted. She laughed through her tears. He stood and pulled her close, pressing his lips to hers, as the lake glimmered behind them in the morning light. From the water's edge, Eli's voice rang out. Did Mommy say yes? Clara pulled away. Laughing, I did. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and together they walked back toward the house that once felt too big, too cold, too empty, now echoing with laughter and the quiet hum of belonging. That afternoon the garden bloomed, as if it had been waiting for this day. Soft lanterns dangled from the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Wooden chairs stood neatly between rows of lavender, and rows their petals turned toward the aisle like quiet witnesses. The wedding was simple. No grand display, no paparazzi, just those who mattered, the people who had walked with them through darkness and helped them step into the light. Clara entered barefoot. Her dress was airy and pale, like the color of the sky just before sunrise. She'd sewn it herself in the evenings, threading quiet hope into every stitch. Inside the hem, where no one could see, was a tiny heart she had embroidered for Eli, a reminder of who brought her here. When Ethan saw her, time paused. She wasn't a symbol of elegance, she was truth, soft, steady and real. At the altar, Eli stood proudly in a tiny suit, his bow tie askew and knees still grass-stained from earlier play. When he saw his mother appear, his chest puffed, his smile radiant. The music that played was familiar, a soft instrumental of the lullaby Clara used to hum when she baked. It floated across the garden like a whisper of old dreams remembered. As Clara stepped forward, every footfall seemed to echo the journey she had walked through, fear through loss toward love. And at the end of that path stood the man she once feared she'd never deserve, and the child who had made her braver than she ever thought possible. She was not walking toward a promise. She was walking into it. Ethan reached for Clara's hand as she stepped beside him, his fingers trembling with everything words could never fully express. She gave him a soft smile, already crying, and whispered, "Hey, hey," he replied, barely managing to keep his voice steady. There were no traditional vows that day. No borrowed words, just quiet promises, crafted from porch conversations under starlit skies, from silent grief shared over coffee, from hope slowly reborn in moments they never expected. I vow to be the refuge you were once denied, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. To be your quiet on hard days, your laughter on good ones, to choose you not once, but every day. Clara took a breath, her voice clear and sure. I promise not to run when it's hard to stay, to listen, to believe. You gave me back my name and reminded me I never needed fixing, only love. Then little Eli climbed a step stool and unfolded a card, reading in a careful, proud voice. Mom used to cry when it was really quiet. But now she sings while making pancakes. Ethan smiles at her like she's made of magic and she makes him banana bread. So I think that's love. I'm glad we're a team now. The guests laughed and cried in equal measure. Ethan wiped his eyes, Clara kissed Eli's forehead, and when they were finally declared husband and wife, there was no loud applause, just the sound of content, hearts beating, of people knowing they had witnessed something rare and real. That evening, as the last light slipped behind the trees, they sat together at a long table beneath the open sky, just the three of them. Plates passed quietly between hands. The glow of candles danced along the wooden grain of the table. Wildflowers leaned gently in their jars, and Eli, sleep-heavy, leaned into Clara's shoulder. Ethan reached out, intertwining his fingers with hers. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had each wandered alone for too long, faced different storms, carried different losses. But now, after one rain-soaked night, one brave question, one open car door, they had found their way home. Not a perfect home, but a true one. And for them, that was everything. As the stars blinked into the night sky above the garden, and the lanterns swayed like tiny constellations, made just for them, one truth became clear. Love doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it arrives soaked and shivering in the dark. Sometimes it sounds like, "Can you give us a ride?" And sometimes it grows into forever, not through grand gestures, but in shared silences, in ordinary kindness, in showing up over and over again. Ethan, Clara, Eli. They taught us that family isn't always found in bloodlines, but in lifelines. That healing doesn't mean forgetting, but remembering together. That second chances are not rare. We just have to be brave enough to take them. So if this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that love is still possible even after the hurt, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here we believe the most powerful stories aren't always the loudest. They're the ones whispered between broken hearts that dared to hope again. Thank you for watching. And remember, some stories don't really end. They just begin right where the tears fall. Absolutely. Here's the outro for your story, a heartfelt reflection that wraps up the emotional journey of Daniel, Emily, and Noah, while leaving your audience with a sense of hope, warmth, and gentle inspiration. The tone stays deeply moving and human, in keeping with your Soul-Stirring Stories brand. In the end, there were no fireworks, no grand applause, no dramatic twists, just a table under the open sky, a child's sleepy head resting on his mother's shoulder, and a man who once believed he had everything finally holding the one thing he never thought he'd find: a family. This wasn't a fairy tale, it was something better. Real, earned, quietly sacred, because sometimes the most powerful kind of love doesn't arrive with lightning. It arrives in the rain, soft, steady, uninvited, and exactly what we needed. Daniel, Emily, and little Noah reminded us all that broken hearts can still be brave, that safety can feel like home, and that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You're not alone anymore." If this story touched your soul, if it reminded you of the kindness we all deserve, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We bring you real and emotional journeys that light a candle in the quiet corners of the heart. Until next time, remember this. Some stories don't end. They begin right where the tears fall.